I don't know if the camera can focus on this beautiful Suzani. You can see in back of her are other Suzanis.
What is a Suzani?
If we only knew how to do
Suzani.
it.
What's it mean?
That's the name of this kind of design that they do, this material.
It's just the fabric then, not
No, it's not a fabric, it's the embroidery. It's very, it's unique to Central Asia.
Oh,
This one happens to be from Uzbekistan, but the one in back of, it's unique to all the stands that we have talked about. And it's such a beautiful piece.
There's another
I thought Jim
engineer.
was going to display it or something.
There's another engineer.
So you can take a look at it.
Yay!
Oh, thank you.
Yay, we did it.
It's all in the wrist.
Magic thumb.
Yeah, can't see where you're going.
I used it for Faye. I used the thumb and he did it.
Gotta use the correct
Magic
thumb.
thumb?
I don't have a cursor here for some reason, but
It has
you
to
can
stay
see in
in
the upper
front.
right-hand corner how to spell it. It's just Suzani is what it's pronounced. I'm not sure this one is handmade, but a lot of them are hand embroidered.
Ah, there we are. Oh, okay.
So there's Tajikistan, not the biggest of the stands, but it's a landlocked country surrounded by other stands that we've been to. The one that surrounds it is Uzbekistan, you'll see in another slide, and Kyrgyzstan.
Oh,
I don't know how well you can see that. I can barely see it myself, but the yellow one is Tajikistan.
North India.
is that orange one?
The orange one, I can't even see that on my map. But it's interesting that over here is China. Oops,
On that side, okay.
China. So there were times, especially in Kyrgyzstan, when we were riding right along the border. So you could see China on one trip and Iran on the other trip. And here is Tajikistan in perspective, with Asia up here and the Middle East down here. It's a very interesting part of the world. I would love to go back. I enjoyed it very much.
How long ago were you there?
2010. You know that Angela in the beauty parlor here that works with Maria is from Tajikistan. Yeah, and she had to leave. She left and her family 27 years ago. So right after the Soviet Union died in 1991, there was, well, she's Jewish. Her family is Jewish. And after the Soviet Union dissolved, even though the Soviet Union was not that friendly to minorities, the people who came in, particularly the Muslims, were not at all friendly, and so they had to leave. And she left with $300, the whole family had $300, and somehow got out. And I had trouble getting the whole story from her, but if you ever have time to talk to her, it's a very interesting story. Her brother was just there. She didn't feel like she could talk about it because it's been 27 years since she's been there. So here's the whole of everything that's called Central Asia. And I showed pictures from Kazakhstan here twice. Once when I was in the capital in Astana, and once when I was on this trip, the old capital, Almaty. I guess to get closure on the stands, I should show something about Kazakhstan again. But you can see that there's a lot of other countries that are not stands, that are considered Central Asia. And these are the stands that we've talked about here. And today is Tajikistan, so.
What's standing?
State.
State.
State. So, Tajikistan is a country in Central Asia, surrounded by Afghanistan, China, Kyrgyzstan and Uzbekistan. So you can see it's very strategically placed. And of course, at one time, it was part of the Soviet Union. It's known for rugged mountains, popular for hiking and climbing. That's not what I did.
Oh.
The Fan Mountains near the national capital, Dushanbe, have snow-capped peaks, and you'll see pictures of that rise over 5,000 meters.
Jesus.
The range encompasses all these: the nature refuge, a bird habitat, and a turquoise lake, and you'll see pictures. It's a beautiful country, little country. The Tajiks began to be conscripted in the Soviet Army in 1939, and during World War II, around 260,000 Tajik citizens fought against Germany, Finland, and Japan. Not sure about Finland. Between 60,000 and 120,000 of Tajikistan's 1,530,000 citizens were killed during World War II. So they did contribute to the war effort, and they have not had a peaceful country since then. It's been torn by civil war and other invasions. Per capita income is pretty low, $819.
How is it now?
Well, now it's peaceful, poor. A lot of people have left, as you'll see. So after independence in 1991, when the Berlin Wall came down, the nation almost immediately fell into civil war between different factions in the country that involved various factions fighting one another, often distinguished by clan loyalties. Central Asia basically was made of clans until they got unified into states. More than 500,000 residents fled during this time, and I think that's when Angela left, because of persecution, increased poverty, and better economic opportunities in the West or in other former Soviet republics. And you'll see people in Tajikistan, and a lot of the stands, but especially here, go to Russia to work. So this guy, Rahman, came to power in 1992, and he's been the president since then, which is very common in Central Asia. And he defeated this other prime minister with 58% of the vote. We're not so sure about the elections in Central Asia, but then we're not so sure about the elections here either. So after the war, Tajikistan was in a state of complete devastation. The estimated dead numbered over 100,000. Around 1.2 million people were refugees inside and outside of the country. So you can see that they've had a long way to come since World War II. They have their own Tajik language, but they speak Russian, and so do the other stands, so it's a way of communicating. Population now is almost 9 million people. They have aluminum production, cotton growing, and the major way is remittances from migrant workers. Cotton accounts for 60% of the agricultural output, supporting 75% of the rural population. Most of the population is rural, and using 45% of irrigated arable land. As you know, cotton takes up a lot of water. The aluminum industry is represented by the state-owned Tajik Aluminum Country, which is the biggest aluminum plant in Central Asia and one of the biggest in the world. So it's not just a nothing country, it's very rich in minerals that are valuable. The rivers have great hydropower potential, and the government is focused on attracting investments for projects for internal use and electricity exports. Tajikistan is home to the Nurek Dam, the highest dam in the world. I didn't go there, so I don't have pictures of it. I happened to go there, not by accident, but according to my itinerary, I was just supposed to go on a, not even a day trip, a couple of hours to Panjikent. I was in Samarkand, and my driver drove me to the border. I walked across the border, and this very nice man met me there. And he was a guide, and he took me to this ruin. That was the main feature of Tajikistan that I was supposed to see in my itinerary, because there wasn't time to see more. And there are ancient ruins there. I'm not even sure how ancient they are. But I had a problem with my visa. I didn't get a two-way visa. Probably my fault, not my travel agent's fault. I think I told you about my travel agent from Tashkent that set all this up, sight unseen. We did it all on the internet. So on this trip I visited 6 countries, 16 cities, and he set all this up. And as you've heard before, I call it my faith-based trip because it was only a matter of faith that I would cross the border and somebody would be there. So he was there, and we drove to a little house, and there were other tourists there, and we had a little meal, and then we drove to the ruins that he was in charge of there. And as it turned out, I couldn't get back. So there were a lot of histrionics at the border because I knew my driver was waiting for me to take me to, actually to a plane that I was going to another country. And they wouldn't let me back because I didn't have the right visa. So tears didn't help, nothing helped, and it was pretty hot. And they got in touch. I didn't have a cell phone or anything. Thank you. They got in touch with my driver and changed all the arrangements so that at the end of the day, or about twilight, they arranged for me to get a driver, 2 drivers, to drive down to Dushanbe, the capital, which I was really eager to see anyway, and I was so happy that that happened. So you'll see what I saw. So I didn't have that much time in Tajikistan, but I'm so glad that happened by accident because you'll see why. How many of you know in Boulder, Colorado?
Yeah.
Yeah, so there's a Dushanbe tea house there. I'll show it to you in a minute. But I had spent many a wonderful time there, meals, wonderful place, and I've always wanted to see Dushanbe, so there by accident, I got to see it. So this is an archaeological reservation. I'm not much on archaeology, so I can't really tell you much about it, but this very nice man spent a lot of time explaining it. And this is a little classroom where we saw the artifacts and pictures of what it used to be there. It's quite ancient. Even this painting indicated that the Chinese were there. Even, it looks very Indian to me. But they unearthed all these things. And then I went to the marketplace, and these interesting people were there. I even bought some things there. But if you wondered what Central Asian people look like, she's sort of a typical looking Tajik woman, and Angela looks like anybody else. So they don't look particularly Asian.
She's very bright.
Yeah. So is Angela. These are the kind of foodstuffs they sell. She was so cute.
So friendly.
And they certainly don't look any different than anybody else. And you can see in the background what the women wear. So when the arrangements were made, it was just about twilight. I think we drove about 2 hours or more, and I think it was the Pamir Highway. And it was amazingly beautiful, I thought, especially at twilight when people were walking their lambs and their sheep home. And there was a river on one side, and the back of the river was mountains. And both sides, I guess, were mountains, Pamir Mountains. It was a beautiful ride. These guys were playing rock and roll music on their radio, but otherwise it was a lovely ride. And you can see there's, I think this, what did I just say? Embroidery on the back, in the background. So this is a picture of what it looked like on this highway. It's really a lovely country. And it's the smallest country in Central Asia by area, covered by mountains of the Pamir Range, and more than 50% of the country is over 3,000 meters, 9,800 feet above sea level.
How's the weather? How is the weather?
It was July.
It was cool.
I think it was fine. I don't remember being too hot or too cold. You remember the weather when you're there, and then afterwards I forgot what the weather is like. And flowers were blooming. It was a beautiful sight to see, leaving aside the rock and roll music. While the state is constitutionally secular, Islam is practiced by 98% of the population. But as I've said before, when these stands were occupied in any occupation in Central Asia by the Soviets, they were not, as you know, practicing religion. So those countries that were Islamic and are Islamic now, I would say they're Islamic light. You don't hear a call to prayer. The women are not covered. They may be wearing long dresses, but they're not covered. So it's Islamic, but not much. And they speak Russian as their second language. 90% of the country is mountainous. And their economy is largely dependent on remittances, aluminum and cotton production. I've never asked Angela whether she sends remittances home, but she might.
What are those little things in the background? Three little,
Yurts?
Sunflowers.
no, they look like yurts or.
Well, there are certainly yurts there. Those two houses in the background are not yurts, but you'll see yurts, I think. There's yurts all over Central Asia and Mongolia, of course. I stayed in a, we saw pictures, well, you don't remember all these things, showed pictures of my staying in a yurt in Mongolia. And also in Kyrgyzstan, we had lunch in a yurt. I didn't stay in a yurt here.
Like a tent?
Sort of like a tent. Fancier than a tent. It's a permanent home that can be disassembled and carried off if they're a nomadic tribe.
We have yurts here in San Diego.
We have yurts here.
Yes, we do, on a mountain my friend owns.
Oh,
And
they're popular houses. They're quite comfortable. They can be decorated beautifully. They depend on a heating source in the middle,
and the
which,
bathroom.
yeah. So they built remarkable tunnels under the mountains because you had to get from place to place. And some of these tunnels were pretty scary because they had water in them and they weren't quite finished. This doesn't tell you very much, but this was another car coming in the other direction. I was glad to be out of the tunnels. They were, I guess they were sturdy enough, but they were not finished. So about 10 miles outside of Dushanbe, we stopped the car, and these guys laid out this tablecloth, and they had brought some food, and we had a little picnic. By this time it was dark out, as you can see. But we got to Dushanbe maybe about 9 o'clock at night or whatever it was, and they were under orders to take me to the best hotel in Dushanbe, which was very nice. And this is the buffet in the morning that I enjoyed. It's very nice. I'm not a big bacon and eggs person, so I'm very delighted when I go to a country where there's not traditional breakfast. I was very happy with this one.
Fruit?
Fruit and cheese and meats, pastries. So after independence in 1992, after the Russian Revolution in 1917, guerrillas throughout Central Asia, known as Basmachi, which we'll talk about in a minute, waged a war against Bolshevik armies in a futile attempt to maintain independence. Bolsheviks prevailed after a 4-year war in which mosques and villages were burned down and the population heavily suppressed. This is the beginning of when religion was suppressed. Soviet authorities started a campaign of secularization. Practicing Islam, Judaism, and Christianity was discouraged and repressed, and many mosques, churches, and synagogues were closed. But according to Angela, there was not a period there of anti-Semitism, just that people were not allowed to worship in their places. As a consequence of the conflict in Soviet agricultural policies, Central Asia, Tajikistan included, suffered a famine that claimed many lives. So that was a very difficult time in Central Asia. And but it's built itself up, as many of these stands have. They all have. And here's a very impressive building. The country, has been criticized for authoritarian leadership, lack of religious freedom, corruption, and widespread violation of human rights. It's true practically of every country that we talked about here. This is a typical outfit for a man, but not necessarily. The earliest recorded history of the region dates back to about 500 BCE. That's true of all these stands, when much, if not all, modern Tajikistan was part of the Achaemenid Empire. Sounds like spiders, but I don't know. This is a baby cradle that I saw in the marketplace. They don't wear diapers, they just have holes in the cradle. Seems to work very well. They're hand carved, they're very pretty. And they're portable, you just carry them by the handles. So, Dushanbe is the capital on the Varzag River. And on the east bank is Rudaki Park, named for the classical poet. I was always impressed in Central Asia and other parts of the East that the people that were venerated in the statues were not generals. They were poets or musicians or artists. And that's true here. Rudaki is a classical poet. So this is a monument to him. And the flag is somewhere. And this is also, in the background, it is not Rumaki, but a warrior, okay. And he's standing in the arch. And the archaeological finds are displayed at the National Museum, which we'll see in a minute. This is national sport, Gushtigiri, a form of traditional wrestling. I didn't see it, but I stole these pictures from somewhere. It's quite interesting. And this is another national sport, Buzkashi. When I said these rebels were called Buzkashi, this probably comes from this horsemanship, which is very popular in Central Asia and Mongolia. And they're playing something like basketball on horses, very much like polo. My guide, whom you'll meet in a minute, in Dushanbe, I told her that I would love to hear music. And she took me to this museum of musical instruments, and we were so fortunate because as we were looking at things, all these musicians came in. I'm not sure they were performing or whether they were rehearsing, but in any case, we heard music and we met some of these amazing instruments, which you see a lot of these in Central Asia and in parts of China too.
Are any of those balalaikas?
No, balalaikas I think in Russia, but these are related. Balalaika is like a cello, and it comes in a bass and a high-pitched balalaika. If you're interested in balalaikas, there's a balalaika orchestra that comes out of Los Angeles once a year to San Diego. It's quite a treat. So here they are. There's an audience, so I guess it was a regular performance. I didn't record any of the music. So downtown Dushanbe has its, I called it McTajiks. I don't think that's what it's called, but something like McDonald's. And you can see people are dressed in modern dress. And the menu is very appealing. To me, anyway, I could eat this stuff. There's hamburger-like things, too. And there's a woman in traditional costume sweeping. That's unusual to see. Well, I guess older women dressed like that. We went into an Orthodox church, I guess Russian Orthodox. Very pretty church. In some of the Orthodox churches, there's no seats, so you go to the service and stand up. Not the imam, but the priest. So this is a church, not a mosque, even though this is a Muslim country. Okay, meet my guide. I have to say she was the high point of my trip. This young, pretty woman. Nowadays, it's a big chess family that she comes from. I mean, a small family, but they're very big on chess. So she learned chess from her father, who is now teaching chess in Moscow. And he's one of the people that emigrated to Moscow for a better job. But she and her mother are part of the Tajik Olympic chess team. And she spends a lot of time, I forget how many hours a day, learning chess moves and competing on the internet with other chess players. She's very serious about it. And she's also a student somewhere. I can't remember where she's a student, but. And behind her is this wonderful Suzani, more typical colors for Tajikistan. She took me to the historical museum named after the poet Rudaki. And this woman up here, I don't know what role she played, but she was sitting there at the door, welcoming everybody. She was quite a character. They require that you wear slippers, and this is a picture of the dictator, the president, whatever he is. A wonderful sleeping Buddha here, which was really surprising because nobody said anything about Buddhism. It's not one of the religions here, but this antiquity is definitely very valuable. That's a warrior, I guess. There she is. It's an amazing wooden Buddha. And then there was a textile museum, and I love textiles. There I am, about to be somebody. And here's a close-up of the embroidery. It's very much like my Suzani here. And hats. I have a little collection of hats for men, and they're beautiful, all different. There's another. That's not a hand. That's a tile, or painted on the wall. I think that's just beautiful. I love that. Fortunately, it wasn't for sale. That's a traditional, but an old traditional outfit. And you can see in the back another Suzani. So nearly 47% of the GDP comes from immigrant remittances, mostly from Tajiks working in the Russian Federation. I'm not sure how many got to the United States. The current economic situation is fragile, largely owing to corruption, uneven economic reforms, and economic mismanagement. With foreign revenue precariously dependent upon remittances from migrant workers overseas and exports of aluminum and cotton, the economy is highly vulnerable to external shocks. International assistance played an essential source of support and helped reintegrate former Civil War combatants into the civilian economy, which keeps the peace. International assistance also was necessary to address the second year of severe drought that resulted in a continued shortfall of food production, and we know about droughts. Here's some very lovely Tajik women in traditional outfits. And they call it Navruz, but you know Nowruz is the traditional Persian festival And I guess it goes beyond Persia. It's a lovely, cheerful festival with very good food. I remember, I think during Obama's administration, they celebrated Nowruz in the White House. These are people who live in the mountains. You just wouldn't expect to see blonde-haired, blue-eyed people in Central Asia, but there they are. Yagnobi people. And it's part of the tribal inheritance of these stands, where there are different obscure tribes. A lot of these stands have a high rate of literacy thanks to universal education that was provided by the Soviets. So it's been a long time since the Soviets were here, but they maintained their free educational system with 99.5% literacy. That's an accomplishment. In 2009, I don't think this has changed radically, 1 million Tajiks worked abroad, mainly in Russia. But more than 70% of the female population, which is often left behind, live in traditional villages. You can see how alert and healthy and smart these people look. They seem to me.
In Stalin's time, the Jews were not allowed to go to school. They had to sneak in people.
We'll have to discuss that later, because if we're trying to film this and your remarks don't come out. But what Anne was saying, at one time the Jews were not allowed to go to school. I don't think this was ever true in Tajikistan. We can ask Angela about that, but she says that before the breakup of the Soviet Union, Jews had a good life there. So I was looking for what I remember from Boulder, the Dushanbe Tea House, which we'll look at in a second. And finally I found something that resembled it. This is a ceiling of one of the buildings we went in as we were going to lunch. This is the outside of the building. Very elegant. It's a woman in regular street dress over there. Another ceiling. More things. Well, this is a sad state. Drug trafficking is the major illegal source of income in Tajikistan, as it is an import transit country for Afghan narcotics bound for Russian and, to a lesser extent, Western European markets. Some opium poppy is also raised locally for the domestic market. Tajikistan has achieved transition from a planned to a market economy without substantial and protracted recourse to aid, which receives only negligible amounts, and by purely market-based means, simply by exporting its main commodity, cheap labor. We talked about the Nurak Dam. Tajikistan holds third place in the world for heroin and raw opium confiscations. And drug money corrupts the country's government. It's a familiar story. 70% of the population is under the age of 30, also common in Central Asia, and 35% are between the ages of 14 and 30, which means that you have to find a lot of employment to keep the youth interested and not starting revolutions. According to some estimates, about 20% of the population lives on less than $1.25 a day. So migration from Tajikistan and the consequent remittances have been unprecedented in their magnitude and economic impact, not unlike Mexico and Central America, so dependent on remittances. Here is an aluminum smelting plant, the largest aluminum manufacturing plant in Central Asia, and Tajikistan's chief industry. Probably polluting, but couldn't tell. Okay, here is the Dushanbe Tea House in Boulder, which is all I ever knew about Dushanbe before I got there. And if you ever have a chance to go there, it's just a wonderful building. It's really more elegant than anything I saw in Dushanbe. This was, Dushanbe and Boulder are sister cities. So Boulder built them an internet facility. And the Tajiks built this beautiful tea house. Apparently they tore the internet facility down, so obviously we got the better part of the bargain. Food here is very good too. All this stuff comes right out of Dushanbe, Tajikistan. It has to be a letdown to come from a place like this into the real Dushanbe and not find anything that's quite so beautiful. Okay, back to the real thing. Here's a Dushanbe woman. It's interesting what she has on her head, because when I was in the southern part of Syria, which is very strict Muslim part, not Syria, but Turkey, on the border of Syria, that color, that scarf is what you had to wear. And I have two of these. They're beautiful scarves, very inexpensive. And she has quite a different thing on her head. There's three little girls from school. Now they look more, I think, what you would expect Central Asian women to look like. They look a little bit like Angela. Eating with the hands is very common everywhere. I'm going to Ethiopia soon, and that's how you eat in Ethiopia. So, public education in Tajikistan consists of 11 years of primary and secondary education. It's pretty good. There's a relatively large number of tertiary education institutions, including the state university, which has 76 departments and 15 faculties. Tajikistan State University of Law, Business and Politics, all these other universities were established during the Soviet era, most of them. As of 2008, tertiary education enrollment was 17%, which the regional average is 37%. So it's gone down probably from when the Soviets were there.
Percent of
The
what?
Russians.
Percent of what?
Percent of the population
What?
goes to higher education.
Population goes to university?
University or one of these other tertiary institutions. Some of them are technical schools. At that time of the year, the countryside was beautiful. And the mountains and the rivers, it's really beautiful. This is a funny picture, I thought. She's using her iPhone. He sure looks like he's using his iPhone.
Looks like that.
The healthcare system remains extremely underdeveloped, with severe shortages of medical supply. That's life expectancy as at 66. That's not terrible, but it's not good. This is the Rubaki Monument. Here's the airport, quite nice. And this is goodbye. So, I'm happy to answer questions, and oh, okay.